Hi lovelies, it's MLP with LovelyLouLouDesigns, and in this video I will show you how to make this gray wood grain Old Fashioned Sleigh Rides tumbler with chocolate drips and candies. As always, I will link the materials I used to create this tumbler, including the digital image, in the description section of this video. If you're watching this video right at its release, I want to let you know that my Etsy shop, where this and similar hot chocolate and hot coffee images are sold, is having a Cyber Week sale until December 2nd, 2020 for Black Friday. You will receive 50% off your order when you spend $12 or more at my shop. This is the biggest sale I've ever run and will be my last one for the year. With that out of the way, let's get started. Once again, I'm starting with a fully prepped stainless steel tumbler, so what that means is this has been sanded, cleaned, and then spray painted. I used a white primer. I used Premier brand from Canadian Tire, but Rust-Oleum is another great brand for that. I've had some people ask me questions about which sander I'm using when I'm sanding my tumblers, and I just wanted to show you guys really quickly which one it is. I just purchased the Tack Life, which I got off of Amazon.ca. This is the mouse style detail sander. I like the style because I like the shape of the detail. It kind of allows me to get into some of the areas that it would maybe be harder if it was just a square or round sander. So for instance, when I'm doing handle cups specifically, it kind of allows me to get a little bit easier in and around the handle. However, that being said, I still can't get the full surface coverage with that. In that case, what I do is I just take a piece of sandpaper that I have, I've just ripped it off, and I just kind of sand in and around there as well. When I am sanding, one of the things that I do want to mention is that I do pay special attention to the areas where I feel like if it were to drop, it would be most likely to get the brunt of the impact, and that is the bottom edge of the tumbler, the rim right around here, and also if you have a handled cup, everywhere around the handle of places that I'm really going to focus my sanding on. I want to make sure I get a good job there, so that way everything is going to adhere and grip hopefully best in those sort of locations. So moving on, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be doing a wood grain. I like to do a gray wood grain when I'm going to be using a transparent water slide, and that's going to be what I'm doing today. So one of the things I want to mention is that not all alcohol inks, which is what I used to do my wood grains, as so many of us do, are created equally. So what I mean by that is a lot of the blacks and grays have other colors in them. I have one gray, when I put it down, it is really green. I can't think of the names offhand, but when I use that one, it just kind of turns out green. The Tim Holtz black, I find, turns purple, but the Pinata black is a really good one. The other one that is really good is Mars Black by Bria Reese. Also, the grays from Bria Reese are pretty good as well. The only thing that I find with the Bria Reese Mars Black is that it's almost too black. I have a harder time lightening up the pigment to get it to sort of a lighter gray that I'm looking for. So this is my color of choice. It is the Pinata black, and you can get that in Canada from Shades of Clay, which is where I got it. You can also find these at DAHT Merchandise, where you can also find the Bria Reese line if you want to give them a go. They're a really great alcohol ink company as well. And the last place that I can think of that I've purchased alcohol inks from before is Pressing Images. That's the name right there. The other color that I'm going to be using today is going to be Liquitex Acrylic ink in neutral gray. I'm going to be mixing this with a little bit of 99% isopropyl alcohol. I'm going to be using this a few times throughout this tutorial as well. And another thing that I want to mention is the tools you're going to be needing. So we have here the my main brush, which is just a textured old kind of chip brush. The more stiff the bristles are, the better it's going to be to get you that wood grain texture that you're looking for. I have another one which is similar. It's very, very rigid. I really like the texture I get from this brush. It's just a little bit smaller. And I'm also going to use this finer, smaller brush as well to help me when I'm going to be doing my knots. I have here, it's a 10-ounce coffee mug with a squared off handle. The reason why I'm using this one today and not the one that I was using for my Christmas Overkill tumbler is because I prefer to put water slides on a flat side. I do not know in Canada where you can purchase these. Again, I purchased mine direct from manufacturer. However, there are some other alternatives that they're a little bit taller, a little bit longer, that come with the squared off handle as well, that have the straight side if you're looking for that as an option. But you still can do it on the Potbelly 14-ounce like I had used for the Christmas Overkill overkill tumbler. These are classified as a 10 ounce. However, when I did fill my 14 ounce with water and pour it into here, it was the same amount. It carried the same amount. So they are in fact the same size. I don't know if they're 14 ounce, 10 ounce, or somewhere in between, but they carry the same amount. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to start off by putting some 99% alcohol in a dish. You're also going to want to have some paper towel with you. I'm going to start with my larger brush, and I'm going to just shake up my alcohol ink a little bit. And I'm going to start by just doing a small line of the black. You're not going to need a lot of color for this because we're going to be making the black gray, so a little bit of pigment is going to go a long way. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my brush into the rubbing alcohol, sorry, not rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, and I'm going to start spreading that color out around the tumbler. With this, it's not going to really look like too much until it starts kind of coming together. You're going to be building your texture. So as you can see, I have already covered almost all of the surface area of this tumbler with just that one line of the black alcohol ink. So it does not take a lot. If you need to, just dab a little bit here if you have too much on your brush. And when we're coming to the handle, you want to try to get in and around it as best you can. If you need to use a smaller brush to get in there, you can do that. So I'm going to right now, I've got darker color here than I have in some other areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull some of this color and I'm going to put it on my handle. This is a bit of a messy process. I like to glove up when I'm doing it because you'll get it all over your hands, but also if you're working at a desk or around a wall, if you're working on a table that you care about, you might want to cover the surface area of the wall around you. You might want to protect your clothes because this does sort of fling that alcohol ink all over the place. I'm wearing work clothes and I'm in my workshop, so I'm not really concerned about all of that. However, I have moved active projects away from my desk, so then that way I am not accidentally getting flicks of the gray or black alcohol on there. So my first job, what I'm really just looking to do as I'm starting out, is going to be pulling that color all the way around my tumbler so I have good color coverage the entire way around. And that's going to be my focus before I want to start working on that wood grain. Because if you're newer to working with alcohol, you'll notice that as I touch it again, it reactivates the alcohol and it gives me brand new patterns. So I'm not really focusing right now on my texture or how that's looking. I'm just focusing on trying to get even coverage or a color that I'm happy with at the very least all the way around my tumbler. When it starts looking smooth in areas, it just means that I had a lot of rubbing alcohol on my, isopropyl alcohol on my brush. So that's where if you're having a lot of that, especially when you're actually going to start dealing with the texture of the wood grain and you're trying to build that texture, where you're going to want to dab it off a little bit on your paper towel before you're going to be applying it. So I'm going to show you what I mean. So right now I'm not really going to dab, and I'm just going to spread it, and you're going to see that it kind of settles. At first it looks like it's got some texture on it, but as it kind of dries, it softens those lines and it really settles. And we don't want that for our wood grain. That's not going to get us a very nice wood grain. So as I'm going to get into that point where we're going to start building the color, I'm going to start dabbing off my brush a little bit to help prevent that from softening and running too much. And as you're alcohol dries off of your tumbler, which doesn't take that long, and you go back over it, you will notice that you're able to retexturize it in those areas. So one of the things I'm going to show you here is that, as I said, the blacks are built up of different colors, and you kind of can start seeing them as you're pulling, as you're thinning that color with the alcohol. You can see that there are browns in here, and this is one of the reasons why I like this particular black, is because it has those browns, which I kind of feel like gives me a little bit more of a wood sort of look to it. So I like the color that it sort of separates into as I play with it. So now what I'm going to start doing is, I'm kind of happy with sort of some of the color coverage I've got here. Now I want to start building my texture. So I'm going to start dabbing some of that excess alcohol off of my brush. And I want to start to build that texture. So what I'm going to do is, sometimes I'm going to come from the top, sometimes I'm going to come from the bottom, sometimes I'm going to be just in the middle, sometimes I'm going to do the full length, and I'm just trying to make sort of an uneven, chaotic, no rhyme or reason sort of pattern to this, to try to build up some natural wood grain look. And if you notice white spots, all you have to do is just go back over those spots with a little bit more of the rubbing alcohol. I don't need to add more color to my ink. I am happy with where this is in terms of darkness, but I am seeing in some of my areas right around my rim, I'm kind of having a bit of a white rim, so I'm going to make an effort to sort of just dab around there to kind of bring some of that color back down to those sections. And you can see here that as I'm kind of playing with where I'm starting and where I'm ending, it's sort of making some natural looking patterns into that wood, which is really quite cool. Now what you can do is you can take your smaller brush and you can do something similar around here where I'm maybe not getting in as much because of the size of the bristles. And if you do things like switch from the flat side to the skinnier side, you're also going to get some neat textures in your wood. So I'm going to show you what I mean here. So here I'm using the flat, but then if I kind of come down with that thinner, it's going to start giving me a bit of a different look. And then I can just kind of go back in where I feel that I pulled too much of that color away and bring it back to there. And then once the alcohol is mostly dried, and you'll be able to see that, I'll just come back over it again to reintroduce some of the texture, and that's sort of how I'm getting some of those little effects there. You do not need a lot of alcohol. A little will bring you quite a long way. And I'm just going to bring my smaller brush to bring in just a little bit of texture. Kind of see here. But I'm not done adding color yet either. So what I want to do now, this has got now a bit of a grayish brown kind of look to it. I now want to take my neutral gray, and I don't need a lot. I'm just going to use a little bit of alcohol in it. Hold on. There we go. And I'm just going to use, hold on. Here, just want to mix it in a little bit with some of that alcohol. And now I'm going to take a small amount, dab it on my paper towel, and I'm going to add just a little bit of this gray, which is more of a pure gray. It has a little bit of almost blue hues to it, but not quite. And again, my priority is more just to get the color on there, to start mixing them in together before I really start focusing on that texture. At this point, my brush strokes are very light. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on. I am just very, very lightly going over what I've already done. And by doing this, I'm getting and building more and more texture. So the handles are going to be part of your trickier spots. So just pay a little bit of extra attention to them. And just kind of blend it out as much as you can. Because this is a square handle, I'm going to make sure that I'm doing the flat edges of the handle as well as the flat inside. If you had a rounded one, you would still need to do that, but it would be easier because your brush would sort of cover all of the round angles just by kind of pressing it in. But on the flat one, if you have a flat handle brush, you just need to be a little bit more attentive to those areas. I'm going to show you guys closer what that sort of looks like when I'm done texturizing it. And it's these small attention to detail that you do that kind of sets your work apart. So try not to cut corners. Try to make sure you're paying special attention to all angles and all areas of your tumbler. And now I'm going to do the same thing as what I did before, and I'm going to introduce some of that grayish, the neutral gray, by using the smaller brush. I'm going to take my larger brush and just to put a bit more texture back in, go over it lightly. Again, I'm building my texture here. I'm not erasing all of my brush strokes. I'm adding new ones, erasing some. It's all sort of random, and that's what makes it look more natural. Do the same with this again. And then that looks good. So now I need to sort of look at my tumbler, and I need to assess what it looks like and where it looks like that, and what I plan on doing with this once I have a design. So for me, when I'm working on a tumbler, what I try to do is I try to pre-plan what it is that I want to have on this tumbler from the very beginning. So this way, when I'm working on my background, I'm going to try to put together a background that isn't going to be competing with my design. So here I have more texture on this side than I have on this side, which is good because when I have a tumbler that I make when I don't have a customer for it, I typically will put it, I'm right-handed, most people are, I will hold my tumbler with my right hand. I like to have the image facing me. So I know that this is the side where I want to be putting my decal. And this is the side where it's going to be not really having anything like that, so it can look a little bit more textured. So I kind of like how this is already coming together for me. So now what I want to do next is I want to start adding some knots to it. And this is where mine are maybe a little bit different from some of the other ones that you've seen. Maybe someone else has done it like this. I haven't seen it, but that is not to say that I'm the first to do it this way. It's just how I do them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a knot, I think I want to put a knot right here on the side. So for my knots, typically what I do, hold on. This is just a piece of parchment paper. I forgot to pull off a little piece. Is I'm going to take my black alcohol ink. This is the only time I'm going to be adding more of the alcohol ink to my tumbler. And I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to drop it on here into my tumbler. So this is the finer point brush that I used, or that I showed you earlier. And I'm also going to take some alcohol and I'm going to start dabbing it on. So because I'm doing it this way, where I've stretched out a lot of the color for the actual wood grain part of it, since I haven't done that for the knot, you're going to get naturally darker spots with the knot because I'm not stretching out all of that color. I'm allowing the pigmentation to stay there. And then using some just alcohol, I'm going to start spreading out my knot and blowing on it to help get my edges defined. I'm going to help guide it sort of into a shape-ish that I like, that I kind of want to have it follow, but I'm going to allow the alcohol to sort of dictate exactly the borders that it's going to work within. So I'm just blowing on it to allow the alcohol to move while it's still wet. So that's the start of the knot. Now, I'm going to take my alcohol and my paintbrush, and I'm going to drip some more into the center. And what you're going to find is that it's not going to want, as long as I don't add too much, it's not going to want to exceed the outer border that I just made. It's going to kind of act as a boundary for the ink. And I'm just going to fill it in a similar shape to what I already had on there. All right. So now I've got some outer parts on my knot. Now I'm going to add some more of the black right into the center, and I'm going to repeat the process. Whatever is too much on my brush, I will just wipe away. So you'll notice that just by blowing it, it's forcing the alcohol ink to kind of make a ring. And I just make it smaller and smaller each time I go in. Oh. You want to avoid doing things like what I just did, where I had some alcohol, rubbing alcohol on my, isopropyl alcohol on my glove, and I just kind of messed up the wood grain there. I'm not concerned about it because I'm going to be adding some more features here now anyway. So you can see here that it's still kind of shiny, which means it's still too wet. So I'm just going to blow it a little bit and kind of let it dry. But before it is perfectly dry, very, very lightly, no alcohol on this, I want to keep it kind of dry. I'm just going to lightly go over that knot. And the reason why I'm doing this is just to try to add a little bit of, there we go, a little bit of the wood texture, kind of like those streaks. And that kind of helps to blend it into the surrounding wood grain a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my smaller brush again, and with just a very small amount of the isopropyl alcohol, I'm going to go back over this area. Just fix what I made a mistake in. And I'm just going to kind of go around the outer part of that knot, bring it in like this. I'm going to take my larger brush again and just kind of blend out those edges a tiny, tiny bit. So I have this part right here, which I don't love. So I'm going to take, again, such a small amount. I'm going to dab it till it's mostly dry. And I'm just going to bring that back in. And this is one of the nice things about working with inks, is that they are very forgiving, and they will let you, if you see something that you don't quite like, they will let you kind of go back in and fix them up. You still have time to play with it. Just because it's dry doesn't mean you can't play. All right, and then there is going to be my first knot, just like that. I want to do another knot as well. I'm going to do it on this side, and I think I want this one to be a bit of a longer knot, or a larger knot anyway, and I'm going to put it right here on the opposite side of where that decal would be. So you can see that when I add the alcohol into the center, it just pushes the alcohol ink that I put down there out. And then when I blow on it, it forces it out in all directions. And it gives you that smooth look and those more natural lines without me using my brush. And then when you start doing this, first of all, again, you want to make sure that your brush is dry. You want to make sure you don't have any alcohol on it because you don't want to smear the whole thing. And then lightly kind of test a section first. If it's good, keep going. And this is just, like I said, it's helping me to kind of blur those lines a little bit, add some of the wood grainy texture into the actual knot itself. Yeah, one thing, I don't like the center of my knot. It's not quite black enough, so I'm just going to dab a tiny amount of black right there in my center. All right, now I'm going to come back with my smaller brush and a teeny tiny amount of alcohol on it. Dab most of it off. I'm going to do the same thing as I did before, and I'm just going to kind of go around the knot . So there's my other knot now. So for me, I think I'm actually happy with just the two knots. I'm going to be putting the decal on here, or the water slide on here. It's going to be a hot chocolate cup. You can put one on the bottom too. I've done that a lot, but because I put my care instructions on there, I'm not going to be really doing it on the bottom because I want to make sure that my care instructions are easy to read. So I'm going to actually finish this right here. What I'm going to do next is I want to wait for this to fully dry. So I'm going to wait about 2 hours for this to dry. Then I'm going to hit it with a spray sealer. I'm going to use Rust-Oleum Clear Spray Sealer. The reason why I'm going to be using that and not my usual sealer, which is the Quick Coat, is because if I were to do a brush-on sealer right now, it could and likely will reactivate my alcohol inks. It has in the past. I know the Quick Coat does. I'm not 100% sure about the Minwax Polyacrylic, but definitely the Quick Coat does. So I spray seal it twice first, and then I will do one coat of the Quick Coat, and then I'm going to add my first coat of epoxy onto here. Once I have my epoxy on, I will show you guys my next step. I had put the coat of epoxy on the tumbler. I had a little bit of fish-eyeing. I guess I didn't quite seal it perfectly enough, so I ended up doing a flood coat on it as well to get a nice smooth surface to put my water slide on. And as always, I'm going to be using my lid to help me line up where I'm going to be putting my water slide. One thing I want to mention was I did add a little bit of a shimmer in the last coat of epoxy I did, the flood coat. It was sort of a last-minute decision. I did want to show you how I did that. However, my turner that I usually record on was occupied and I wasn't able to record it. But essentially what I did was I had mixed up about 15 milliliters of epoxy total, and I had added some of this Eco glitter into it. This is also from Cat Glitter Factory. This is the 80 cut. The 80 cut is the finest cut. She has 3 different sizes. The larger the number, the finer the cut. So what I did was I just took my 15 milliliters and I used these little scoopers. They're stool sample scoopers that I get, and I just took like a teeny tiny amount, no more than that, and I put it in my epoxy, mixed it in. You have to be very careful with this. It's very flimsy, fluffy. It just kind of gets all over. If you sneeze or breathe around it, you'll breathe it in, you'll breathe it all over. So wear a desk mask when you're using this, and also just sort of be careful with where you're breathing, or where if you have a fan on or anything like that, you might want to turn it off before working with that. So it just provided this little bit of shimmer in the last coat of epoxy, which I really like because for me, when I'm thinking about Christmas time, it usually has glitter and shimmer and whatnot. So I'm using the Olde Fashioned Sleigh Rides with Hot Cocoa 25-cent file, which is available on my Etsy shop as well. I used the Kiss Cut feature on this. I need to calibrate my machine a little bit, but overall it did a pretty good job with it. So I also, just so you know, on this size mug, I did cut it 4 inches. The reason why I do 4 inches on this is because some of these outer parts of the design make it kind of so it's longer. If I were to put this 3.5 inches, the main part of the design, which is where the writing is, would feel kind of small to me. So I just sort of up my percentage of how large I make it. Usually I make a decal about 3.5 inches on these, but this one I wanted to do 4 just because of how wide the design is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with, I have my bowl with water, and I'm just going to add a little bit of water onto my smooth, unsanded epoxy. I'm going to put this in the water. I'm going to put it upside down, and the reason for that is because it does help to prevent curling. A piece of chunky glitter in my water. Get rid of that. And I'm just going to let it sit in here for a few moments so that it starts to pull away from the backing paper. And I'm going to take this part here, which is the center part of my design, and I'm going to line that up, give or take, with the mouthpiece. And that's about here. And I'm also going to put it just a little bit lower on the tumbler because we're going to be adding those drips to this. So we're going to be doing it right about there. So once I'm kind of happy, oops, maybe I want to pull it down. Hold on. So once I'm kind of happy with where my placement is, I can start putting all these little pieces into place. There we go. So before I really spend too much time getting the water out and making sure that it's nice and straight on there, I'm just going to make sure I've lined it up exactly where I want it. And I'm also going to make sure that it's straight. So I'm going to take my measuring tape, and this is just how I always make sure that images and designs are straight on my tumblers. I just pick a spot and I make sure that it's the same on 2 spots on the design. Let's do that one more time. And it is. So now that I've got that, I'm just going to make sure that all of my little parts here, when I slid this out, I slid it sideways. I should have done it top to bottom because that would have prevented this from kind of folding underneath itself and would have kept all these little pieces here straight. Because this is a flat surface that went on really, really smooth, I don't really have to play with it too much. So I'm just going to take a piece of paper towel and going from the center outwards with light pressure, I'm just going to make sure that there's no water trapped under there or no bubbles, and get a nice smooth, oops, there we go, get a nice smooth finish on that. I'm going to let this dry, then I'm going to take my quick coat, which is right here, and I will just do 1 coat of quick coat on this, and then I'm going to put on 1 more coat of epoxy to help protect my design. And the reason why I'm doing that, you can choose to skip that if you want, but the reason why I want to do that before I add my drips is because if at any point I drip on top of my decal and I need to wash that off, I can take some acetone or some alcohol and wipe it off without worrying about ruining my design that is on my tumbler. So that's going to be my next step, is to use the quick coat. I will let that dry fully, and then I will add 1 more thin coat of epoxy onto this tumbler. The last coat of epoxy I put on just to seal the water slide has now fully cured. I also did a light sand just to scuff the surface a little bit to give the next coat of epoxy a little bit of teeth and grit, something that it can kind of cling on to. And then I washed it with Dawn dish soap and thoroughly dried it. So our next step is going to be to add those drips if you want. If you don't, this tumbler is, you know, absolutely beautiful. It is classic. It is a nice design that I think works for both men and for women. Even children would like it. So this is a pretty versatile design, but I'm going to be adding the optional chocolate drips. So the first thing that I did for that, as I did in my Christmas Overkill tumbler, was I stirred up my epoxy. I've already mixed it. This is about 15 milliliters is what I went for. I don't think I'm going to need that much, but I would always rather mix too much than too little. So my next step is going to be to start adding the Nice and Thick by CC DIY, and this is to thicken up that epoxy so we can get nice thick drips on the tumbler. As I did before, I'm going to start by taking a pretty good scoop and just putting it into my cup before I'm mixing it. So one of the things I want to mention is that this cup has not been lined with anything like wax or anything that would kind of get into my epoxy and contaminate it and cause fish eyes. So what I'm going to start off by doing is I'm just going to start stirring in that CC DIY, and you're going to notice when you're mixing it that it does have some clumps in it. So what you're going to want to do before you add more is you're going to want to break up all of those clumps. So I'm just going to keep stirring and integrating the CC DIY Nice and Thick into the epoxy. If you're having a hard time breaking up some of those clumps or seeing some of those clumps, scoop some up onto your stir stick. You can see there that I still have some, and you can kind of take it and put it up against the inner part of your cup just to kind of help break them down a little bit. But you want to make sure that those are all fully integrated into the epoxy before you move on, just to make it easier to keep mixing it in. You don't want to have lumps in your drips. So now I've got rid of all those chunks, but as you can see, it's still very, very runny. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to add more. At first, you can add quite a bit, but once it starts to thicken, you're going to want to add smaller amounts at a time. And I'm just going to repeat this process, checking the thickness each time before I add more of the Nice and Thick, checking to make sure all clumps are broken down, before I move on. So what I'm doing is I'm testing the thickness of the epoxy on the side of the cup to see how much it drips down. And this is still, I really like my drips rather thick. So this is still too runny for me, but it is starting to thicken up. So now I have to be a little more cautious. So I'm not going to add quite as much of the CC DIY Nice and Thick as I did before. I'm going to start adding smaller amounts. And you're going to notice that once it starts to set up, it goes pretty quick from there. I now have a thickness that I'm pretty happy with. As you can see, it's not super runny anymore. So what I'm going to want to do now is I'm going to want to add my color. So I'm using CC DIY Dispersion Color in Rustic Oak for my hot chocolate drips. This is really nice. It's highly pigmented. It's very thin, so it's not really going to be changing how thick your epoxy is at this point, unlike something like the alcohol inks, which, as I mentioned in my last video, made it a little bit more fluid again. So it doesn't take a lot, and I'm going to want to make sure that I thoroughly mix in that color. Okay, and I'm going to just use a popsicle stick to apply it to my cup. So just like I did before, I'm just going to take my popsicle stick, scoop some out. I'm just going to twirl it on so I don't have any overhang or dripping. And I'm just going to start scraping it off around the top of the tumbler. Okay, so anywhere where I want it to maybe drip down a little more, I can just make it heavier there. And this is exactly why I added that coat of epoxy, because if I need to clean something up, it's very easy to just wipe that off now. Had I not put that epoxy on top, that would be a bit of a problem for me. All right, I'm just gonna put it upside down for a second, just to kind of bring it back closer to the rim. And I'm gonna take some acetone. I'm just gonna clean up that part that I didn't like. If you find it's dripping too far down, just kind of play with it a little bit. You can hang it upside down for a while. I am just adding a little bit to that rim. I'm going to clean this off with some acetone on my turner and a Q-tip before I really let it fully sit and set up and cure. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pop this on my football, and I'm going to pop it on my turner for just a second while I grab something to clean up that rim. Just got my acetone and my Q-tips. Just going to put some there. And I'm just going to go right around the inner part of the rim here and clean that up. That's it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let this turn for a couple hours, let it set up fully, and then I'll show you guys the next step. These set up completely overnight. So what I'm going to be doing next now is I'm going to be adding just a little bit of epoxy onto my chocolate drip rim. And I'm going to kind of keep it so that it's only on my chocolate drip rim, and I'm going to be using it as an adhesive, because what I want to add next is I'm going to be adding these sprinkles from Cat Glitter Company, and it's called Minty Twirl, which is in a way kind of ironic because I just kind of went off not too long ago about how I despise the taste of chocolate and mint together, but it looks really, really pretty. So I'm going to be adding the Minty Twirl sprinkles to the chocolate drips. The reason why I didn't just add them directly onto the chocolate drips when this was still sticky was because I didn't want to have issues with if it got on here and I had to move it, I didn't want it to stain the white sprinkles where I maybe didn't want color to happen, or if I had to shift it and move it around, I didn't want to damage my chocolate drip. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to be using another coat of epoxy, a clear coat, just kind of focusing it on those drips. If it gets a little bit over, it's not the end of the world, but I wanted it to make sure that my epoxy was clear. So like I said, I'm not having any color contamination on those drips, sorry, on the sprinkles. And so if I have to move it for whatever reason, I'm not damaging my drips. All right, I'm just gonna scrape off some of the excess that went a little bit too low, just so I don't have it really thick there. It's not going to be a big deal if you have some there. You can move the sprinkles off if they attach there. The only thing is that I don't want it to be too thick because I don't want to lose some of that 3D effect from the drips themselves on my tumbler. There we go. All right, so I'm going to just let this spin for a few minutes, and then I'm going to torch it to get rid of any bubbles while I go epoxy some other tumblers, and then I will come back to apply the sprinkles. All right, so it's been torched. It's been sitting for just maybe 5 minutes. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding my sprinkles. So I just put them in the lid so it's easier to access. I also have a little tweezer here in case I need to shift and move them around. And I'm just gonna take a couple and I'm gonna just kind of place them on. I don't want to overwhelm it. I'm just going to add a few here and there. All right, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to let this fully harden, and then I will come back to do the final coat of epoxy, which is going to be one thin coat followed by a flood coat at about 4 hours later. If you want to see how I do that with a drip tumbler, you can check out my Christmas Overkill tumbler if you're unfamiliar with how a flood coat is done and you just sort of want to have that information in general. I do have a shorter video which is something like how to do a professional finish with a flood coat. So I'll link those videos here as well so you can check them out. But other than that, this tumbler is done. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please support me by leaving it a thumbs up. If you're new to my channel, please click my logo to subscribe and tickle that little notification bell so you'll be notified of future videos I post. Thanks again for watching, and I'll be back for more tumbler tips and tutorials.